did Germany become such a powerful country?
Kind of dynamic already in the 19th century with the Prussian state, for instance, and the integration of a lot of smaller countries into a unified German state, first as an empire, and then as a republic, then in the Third Reich, and then in two separate countries, and now in a reunified German state. So there is a lot of political dynamics, and that is accompanied by economic dynamics. Some of that derives from comparison that Germans always drew. They always compared themselves to what is going on in Great Britain, for instance, in France, in the United States. Germans in general always strive for being part or being among the most modern economies, and having that export-oriented economy being very strong and still being the basis for German wealth and economic dynamism.
How did Germany become one of the most powerful countries or economies in the world?
So what happened ever since the reunification was, first of all, a phase of weakness. And the first phase of reunification was characterized by investments, by restructuration, by frustrations, also effects of exclusion, new injustice, because you have to imagine that the general wage level on the East was lower than the general wage level on the West. And which means that when these two societies merged, it was like an institutional injustice that was happening. And the mobility was not as high as one would have hoped for. So the first phase was one that was where the problems were really on the forefront. Then around in the first decade of the new millenary, things started to change, at least economically. And some things happened that probably explain why German economy got so strong, especially through exports. The unification was a shock to the economic system, first and foremost on the eastern side, but then there were trickling effects even to the west. And if you see that in the beginning of the 2000s, the German social welfare system, for example, was fundamentally transformed, and that many of the social rights and fundamental securities that German workers used to have were actually reduced, and the German welfare state was clearly reformed. And I think the reunification played an important part in this, because the East was somehow almost a laboratory for that. How an economy on German soil could function in a less regulated, less socially secure way. And when that happened in the East, it also had effects on the functioning on the West. And these reforms that Chancellor Schröder put through in the early 2000s were somehow a consequence of this. If you add these reforms, on the other hand, the traditional strength of a still industrialized country, I think you have the ingredients that explain the growth rates that Germany had in a time when countries like China or the United States were in demand of these industrial goods.